And I think it's really scary to think about what will happen if we don't stop climate change. I've definitely thought about, like, do I even want to have kids? Do I even want to bring them into a world that's, going to be catastrophically changed by climate change?
Even if the climate recovers, we can't go back and redo evolution in the time frame that we're changing things.
I already feel like this is our last chance.
If we don't do anything, we're going to see a disappearance of the polar ice caps.
Our civilization as we know it is no longer going to exist within 50 years.
How do I have any hope for the future?
December 2019. News comes from Wuhan, China, about an alarming novel strain of coronavirus. What we now know as COVID-19 starts spreading, and nations worldwide enforce quarantines and lockdowns. While the world enters crisis mode, a group of filmmakers across the globe grabs their cameras to capture the lives and stories around them. Sharing these stories, they realize, even before COVID-19, we had equally virulent diseases dividing us. Perhaps this virus might be a test for humanity, a wake-up call for change. Filmmakers and storytellers from 22 countries unite in a shared goal to tell the story of a time for healing. This is Sanatione.
Climate change is a global phenomenon that to some might seem like a distant threat, but Santa Cruz County has already started to feel the heat. Intensifying wildfires, droughts, and heat waves threaten lives and livelihoods across the county.
When I was a child, I had access to a beautiful hilltop that my friends and I would play on. And one day we were heading up the hilltop and we found the foundation of a house that was being built in that specific location.
One was the opportunity to work on a river system when I was in high school and counting mollusks to determine river health indicators.
It wasn't until many years later when I found my way to birds that I realized, well, I can ignore this, but the birds can't ignore what's happening to the natural world.
I lived near a little forest in Southern California, and I would kind of escape into the forest. And I went out there, and it gave me a sense that there was something real in the world that was bigger than suburbia.
As a kid, I was really passionate about helping to save the rainforest.
We recently had fires in California that were made a ton worse by climate change.
There's really no escaping it at this point. We're seeing the effects of, extreme wildfires and heat waves in our community.
Recently in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we had really, really major fires, and some of the people that lost their homes will not be coming back to that same location.
We're going to see more intense fires, more flooding, more intense storms. All of that's coming true.
We can all agree that we've observed really radical weather phenomena and climate phenomena across the globe, whether that's the increased incidence and intensity of wildfires in California to the hurricanes that we're seeing with more frequency and intensity down in the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic.
I think people have been saying for years and years that, our time is running out, and people aren't necessarily really listening.
Climate change has affected me and my friends, I think, first and foremost, psychologically. Because it's a really different situation to live with an expectation that the future will be better compared to the idea that the future might not be better, might be much worse, in fact.
We need to do everything that we possibly can, not everything we want to, but everything that we can to stop climate change right now.
There's a huge threat to our food systems, and our economic system won't work the way that it does now. The weather will be different. The sea level will be different. The species that still exist will be different. The amount of fossil fuel, its availability and cost everything will be different. I have heard plenty of scientists say that we have only X number of years to go before the planet will become uninhabitable.
The heat rolls off the tarmac as the wheat fields lay down slow, yielding an empty harvest with their fall. We saw the ice give in from our windows on the wing. Never thought a home would look so small.
I have studied human impacts on both agricultural systems and also on natural systems and on endangered species for about 30 years.
Being concerned about climate change has been one of my major preoccupations for the past 16 or 17 years.
I work with the community and with our various departments on reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the city and the region and dealing with climate adaptation.
The work I did for my PhD focused on tropical forest restoration. And so I decided to pretty much dedicate my life to trying to help save the planet and help save the environment.
I was born in Santa Cruz and have lived in Santa Cruz most of my life. I am a freshman in high school, and I'm also a local climate activist.
I was raised in the Central Valley and in Los Angeles, and I really witnessed firsthand the experiences of environmental degradation.
I think that now that we are overcoming COVID, we can refocus on overcoming climate change.
Climate change is the biggest issue that my generation is going to have to deal with. I think the burden of our climate crisis has definitely fallen on my generation's shoulders. And I know a lot of climate activists do feel anger at the older generations for kind of letting this fall on us.
I don't think older generations are to blame for our climate crisis because I think that there are a lot of things that were done in the past that people thought were okay. Driving a car that gets about 10 miles to the gallon.
I do think past generations have failed in stopping climate change, and that's why we are seeing the effects of it today.
We can think about climate change in so many ways. We can think about the Industrial Revolution and the generations of folks who really didn't know or understand what was happening by combusting fossil fuels.
What we have much more responsibility for in the modern era is waste. And I see waste as having expanded exponentially from when I was born, more or less, in the 1960s. Waste and greed and the concentration of wealth. We have extravagant overuse of natural resources in order to enrich a very few.
I don't think it's productive to assign blame across generations. I certainly feel that we have an obligation to our future generations to deal with this crisis in the best way we can right now.
I think a lot of the times the older generation are kind of stuck in their ways and are thinking that, this is the way that we've always done it and, we can't change things now.
I do think it's really important for older generations to listen to the young generations of today.
I think sometimes people of my generation have trouble applying the tools that we may have learned from the various experiences that did shape us more to this problem. I do see how for the younger generations, it becomes the backdrop for everything.
I think there's different views among people in my age group because it's really hard to face and accept radical change, especially those of us who are living middle-class lives and who have, a fair amount of comfort in our lives right now. It's really hard to imagine that that's all going to be different.
There are definitely many people my age who either can't think about it because it's overwhelming and depressing, or who choose not to believe that it is happening because, again, it's too scary.
90 days and 90 nights, a winter without rain. In a dream, the ocean takes the lawn. Far away an island suffers, far away they flee. Sprinklers hiss a warning in the dawn.
One of the things that climate change is doing and will continue to do has been worsening the divides between people who have more and less privilege.
Climate change is going to disproportionately affect minorities and people of color.
The vast brunt of climate change is going to fall on people who did not have much to do with causing it. You can't actually separate social justice from, say, the climate conversation. Typically, disadvantaged people live in crappy places by oil refineries, and cleaning up those facilities does align to a certain extent with social justice. But the larger issue is that the wealthy, both individuals and nations, can take pretty good care of themselves. Those wealthy and people and nations are also inordinately contributing to climate change.
I've come to see it as not so much a standalone issue, but something that's interwoven with all kinds of other issues of what's not working in our culture and our society.
I deal with folks that come from every perspective on climate change, and I try to maintain a positive solutions-oriented approach, trying to appeal to their value systems. I have solar panels on my house, and I ride an e-bike to work. I think it's difficult perhaps for folks, individuals, to know, how can I plug in? And that's where really genuine, authentic, accountable, and accessible engagement comes into play between the community and local governments.
One of the reasons why it has been so hard to fight climate change, and there are many, many reasons, but one of the reasons is that it is abstract. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. At most, you can kind of worry about your own skin, like, oh, is my house going to get flooded, or is a serious fire is going to burn it down, things like that.
There's two kind of pitfalls for us when we think about the future. One is to kind of turn away from the challenges that face us and to imagine that somehow something will magically happen to make things okay. And I think that's a mistake, because we're on a trajectory that really will be very bad if we don't change it. And the other pitfall, I think, is hopelessness and despair and discouragement. That's also a mistake, because the future is always unknown. But fear is really not our friend. There's always room for surprise in the future.
Helpless sky, as our hungers were unfurled. Beautiful one, in the darkness, you will become another world.